I would like to take this opportunity and tell all the Ukrainians, I know that 3 million people, Russian men and their families, women and children, who have fled Russia, I'm speaking on behalf of them and they would support me. I would like to say, please forgive us. I know it doesn't cut it, but I'm begging for forgiveness.
Hello, and welcome back to On the Edge. Our guest this week is Konstantin Samoilov, who describes himself as the unusual Russian, and in many ways he is just that. An internationalist, he's worked globally, including a stint in the United States of America. Perhaps not so unusually, he is primarily been working within Russia's oil and gas industry. When the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began, out of an act of conscience, he left his comfortable life in Moscow and moved instead to Tashkent, Uzbekistan, where he is a member of a large expat community. He's got a number of different projects that he's involved in, but most notably, he runs a YouTube channel called Inside Russia, where he talks about what's happening on that side of the line, whether it is societal changes, economic situation, financial, cultural. Occasionally, he will talk about things that are military adjacent, but he doesn't really do the whole map thing. He just talks about, when another round of conscription happens and how that's affecting the country, or when one general or another falls out of a favor or indeed falls out of a window. So all of this allows us to have a discussion from a Russian perspective, even if it is an unusual Russian. I hope you'll find this a particularly interesting voice and learn how at least some Russians are perceiving the current war. So,
Konstantin, thank you so very much for coming on our show today. Dobro požalovit on our show. You are our first Russian guest, and we're very happy to have you.
Philip, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I don't really like speaking Russian on my shows and anywhere else, so English would be good. So thank you.
I prefer speaking English as well, especially here in Ukraine.
Yes.
Although I do get away with speaking Russian because they know I'm a foreigner. The second I open up my mouth, they can hear the accent in my Russian, and they generally say, "Normally we would not like to speak Russian with you, but since you're an American, and we understand." So anyhow, I just as a courtesy to our first Russian guest, I welcomed you in Russian. But yes, let's speak English. Let's speak English. I will have explained in my introduction to you your kind of history and your show and other things like that. But let's start I think what is the most important question, and that is, what is your analysis of the way the war is going?
I'm not real big on military analysis. I am very far from anything military. I'm not an expert. I don't know much. All I know about the front lines is probably what a regular person knows, and I'm not competent enough to make educated opinions. I don't know much, but what I do know is that the war has taken a huge hit. Not even a hit. It has destroyed Russian economy. And any war is based on country's economy, okay? You can't wage a war if you don't have money, if you can't pay for what you do. And Russian economy has been destroyed. We are seeing the signs right now, anywhere we look in Russia, and It has taken 2.5 years. I forecasted a quicker demise, but they lasted a long time. And now it's going down, and what Russia is doing, they won't be able to sustain it economically.
I think you're right. And I think obviously we see the fall in the ruble, and we see Gazprom's share prices plummeting, and all the economic indicators. I do spend this is around about my 12th war. I was a war correspondent for many years, so I was in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I do look a little bit at the capacity of the Russian military. And my assessment is that while they may be making incremental gains on the ground, they don't. You're right, financially and even in terms of manpower and equipment, they don't have the means to take the important cities in Ukraine that would be a proper victory for Vladimir Putin. As a Russian and as somebody who, friends, you have Russian friends and family, I'm sure, who are still inside the Federation, he's not going to take Odessa. If he can't take Odessa, he is, the dream of Peter the Great of being a great naval power. Catherine's successes in the Crimea and along the Black Sea, those are gone. I've been to Odessa. I don't know if I know you've been here in Kiev. Did you ever spend any time in Odessa?
I spent 1 year in Odessa. Our company's HQ was in Odessa, and all shareholders were from Odessa. So I spent
how
1
important
year living in Odessa. It's one of my most favorite cities in the world.
Me too. I love Odessa so much. And I have been there several times since the full-scale invasion. Konstantin, I tell you in all sincerity, you would not recognize the city. You would not recognize Odessa. It is a fortress. The people of Odessa, who, as you know, are fiercely independent people, it's a special place with a port, and they kind of look upon themselves as a special kind of place. There was questions about where their loyalty would be. It is a mostly Russian-speaking city. I'm telling you, there is no love in Odessa for Russia anymore when you bomb a city as much as they have. So I'm getting around to a question here, and that is this. Vladimir Putin is the man who is sitting in the Kremlin. When the dream of Peter is betrayed, the conquests of Catherine are lost, and the idea of a third Rome is now nearly impossible. These are pillars of Russian self-identity. I hate to speak for a Russian, but how catastrophic is it for a man to sit in the Kremlin and to have all of those losses, no matter what happens moving forward?
Philip, I have a little different view at this. I think that Putin had all these wet dreams before he started the war. He thought that he would take Ukraine in 3 days. He thought he had the military number 2 in the world. I'm not a military expert, but I see how Russian military has soiled its pants, okay? Perhaps it's number 222 in the world, but certainly not 2 in the world, right? And he was dreaming of that before. After he started the invasion and after he got a punch in his teeth. And I think he realized in late March of 2022, when all of a sudden Russians out of the blue withdrew from Kiev. And everyone started, in Russia started asking the question, wait a second, what just happened? If you withdrew from Kiev, why did you start this mess, okay? And that question was there in the air. I remember quite well, but then things were happening so fast, and then in Russia there are many questions appear all the time. So they tried to downplay it like nothing extraordinary happened. But that was a very key point. You started the war. You promised everyone to take Kiev. You killed so many Ukrainians and Russians. For what? To withdraw 1 month later? Okay, and after that, he realized, and I think after that, he's been in zugzwang, complete zugzwang, and right now he has one dream, to hang on to his power for as long as possible, because that is the only thing that is consuming him, because his power is weakening. Okay, he's created such a mess for everyone and for himself. He could have reigned in Russia for forever had he not started the war. Okay, Russians, they would allow him. Okay, but now all the pains in Russia are so acute that there are many threats. Economic threat, social unrest threat. Those in the army who getting angry, they are pointing their guns to the West right now. But you know what? They can turn around and start pointing to the East. And there are many more threats. So I don't think he even thinks about leaving a legacy of, Peter the Great and all these high words. He just wants to stay on the top for as long as possible. And I think that's becoming more and more difficult for him.
I think almost impossible. I don't know as he had these dreams and the things I'm pointing out is that for the Russian public, these things are very important. And Vladimir Putin is the man in the Kremlin when they have lost all of these things, not to mention the fact that all the promises he made to, restore Russia to its former greatness, that's gone too. There's talk of a ceasefire, right? If they solidify the ground does he survive, or is there any way he comes out of this and survives? Because I think even with a ceasefire and stabilize the lines as they are now, people are going to be very upset as to why did we do this. I don't know. I need to ask a Russian. Does Vladimir Putin survive this?
Philip, it's a very hard question to answer. I don't know. I personally thought he would not survive 2023 after what happened in May, because all of a sudden, out of the blue, Russian cities start getting bombed. And everyone was like, wait a second, that's not supposed to happen. We were promised high security. We invaded Ukraine to beef up our own, security. And the Kremlin got bombed twice. My apartment got bombed, okay? A drone flew to my apartment, like right next door, literally. And there were 9 drones flew in as an attack. And there was a wave after wave after wave in the summer of 2023. And then Prigozhin mutiny.
Yes.
That was a disaster for Putin. I mean, I would like to bring it up, okay? Putin spoke and he was freaking out. He was scared. He was looking small. His hands were shaking. He was saying, brothers and sisters, well, the Russians, please unite behind me, help me. And I thought it was done. I thought this is it. Even if he gets rid of Prigozhin, which he did, then there would be powerful groups that would see, oh, it's possible, and he would be done. So I thought that Prigozhin would serve as a precedent. Well, what we're seeing right now, it's the end of 2024. Putin is still in power, and I don't see anyone taking him down anytime soon. Okay, so can he survive a ceasefire? First of all, I hope that the ceasefire is not going to happen. I hope that the peace will come to Ukraine. That's a big difference in my eyes, okay? And peace is for good. Ceasefire is just a pause to help Russia beef up its military and strike again. Okay, so I hope that the peace will come. I hope the United States will help to negotiate real peace on conditions that Ukraine will find satisfactory and agree on. And I hope that where the troops are standing right now, it's not going to be what the peace will be about. Okay. So I can't tell you if that
as the
happens.
lines stand now, it's only a temptation for him to come back in 5 or 10 years. And I think most Ukrainians share this opinion. We're exhausted, Konstantin. I'll tell you this. We here in Ukraine, we are exhausted of the war, but we also know that if you freeze the lines where they are now, he'll just come back in 5 or 10 years.
But you know what? In 10 years or in 5 years or 2 years, well, probably not 2, he will come back much stronger, much more lethal, with much better army, more trained, more brainwashed, more equipped. And that's going to be a different kind of army. It could be army number 3 or number 4, number 2 in the world. If he puts all the efforts of Russia, the big, rich in resources country, to build up merit. I mean, remember the USSR. A lot of people forget that. All the country that I was born and grew up with was about military, okay? Everything was serving one goal, to defend the country, to make the military stronger and so forth. I mean, it is possible that Russia would turn that way too. So I hope it's not going to be a ceasefire. I hope that's going to be peace. And that's what I think.
We all hope for peace, but a lasting peace. And I think that if he survives this, as the great, American professor Timothy Snyder says, an empire must lose a war to lose the concept of empire. Let me ask you this. Do you think even if Putin doesn't survive, that his so-called Z or Z in quotation marks movement, this Russian imperialist nationalist movement, does that survive Putin if he is thrown out of the Kremlin?
Anything is possible, but we're talking about probabilities. I don't think it's probable. I think what's going to happen is, you see, the state that the Russians are in right now is artificially made. Russians, what they're thinking and what their beliefs and values are right now, it's been engineered by the Russian propaganda. And if Putin is gone, there is going to be a great temptation, whoever comes to replace him, to make amends with the West. So the West forgives that person. The West forgives, the oligarchs, and allows them to go to the West because they don't like Russia. Russia is not a sexy place to live. They like Miami. They like Nice. For goodness sake, they like Odessa. I remember a huge yacht of Gazprom was in Odessa every single summer near Ibiza, and there was a huge party. They like to party in Odessa, okay? They don't like to party in Moscow. They don't...
And certainly not in Murmansk. Certainly not in Murmansk or Irkutsk.
Irkutsk, whatever. So I think whoever will replace him will be tempted to make a deal, okay? And if they make a deal, I'm hoping for this, okay? That they will say, okay, look, whoever's in charge, Trump or, let's talk. It's not us, it's him. We didn't know. We were forced. He took our children, he took whatever. He blackmailed us. He threatened to kill us. We are good guys. We were forced. And of course, we didn't know what's really going on, what was going on in Ukraine. Now we know we are pulled. Please forgive us. We'll do anything. Okay, this is the scenario I'm hoping for. And that scenario will actually has a possibility of turning Russia, okay? Because the propaganda would disappear. Whatever the values they have installed into the brains of people would be gone. And I hope that Russian people wake up and they will start asking questions. That's what they're not doing right now. Once you start asking questions, then things start changing. We started asking questions in the late 80s in the USSR, and look what happened. Okay? So I hope that will happen in Russia as well.
When I was a young journalist, far younger than I am now, I was posted to Moscow, and I lived in Moscow as a CBS producer and a radio reporter. And I shared my office with a Russian who ran our satellite systems, and we would argue every single day about the state of Russia. Now, this was Yeltsin's Russia. This was the late 90s. And what I found so interesting with my office mate, Andrei, was that he knew the reforms that needed to be made. He knew. But he would tell me, it's too much. It's too much of a shock to the system to make the reforms that we all know we need to make. Russians know as better than anybody else the problems in the society that need to be reformed. But they kicked the can down the road with Putin, and now here we are today. I sincerely hope, I agree with you, I sincerely hope that they will make those changes and finally look in the mirror and do the hard work. So I think we both agree with you there. We're both in agreement there. Can I ask you a slightly personal question without getting too in-depth? You have left the Russian Federation because of the situation, because of the SMO, the Special Military Operation in the war. Without getting too personal, how are you as a Russian exile? How is it to have left your homeland because of what Putin is doing?
Well, I never call it SVO because this is a war. When I heard that
it's a war,
Russia attacked Ukraine, first of all, before the war started, I was one of the biggest voices in Russia saying that Russia would never attack Ukraine. Okay, and on my YouTube channel, there are still videos where I would argue that Russia would never do that. How is this impossible? Okay, it seemed impossible. And I found reasons for that. I found that Russian economy would be destroyed. I mean, and Russia and Ukraine are so close. That why would Russia do that? And you know, I woke up on the 24th of February. I remember the day clearly, and I saw the first videos of cruise missiles flying to Ukraine. My world shattered. I couldn't believe it. I was born in Rostov-on-Don. If I take a pebble and throw it real hard, it would land in Ukraine. I spent a year in Ukraine. I traveled to Ukraine so many times. I have friends there. My mom has Ukrainian roots. She's Russian, but, you know, we're so interconnected. And my country attacks Ukraine. Okay, so first thing I did, I made a video. It's out there on YouTube, and I called it The War, you know. And basically, right then, in the first minutes, I stated my position. And me and my wife, we decided to leave. And that day, because, I mean, how can we live in a country that is waging a war in Ukraine? Took us quite a long time. I had a kick in the butt. The mobilization, I was afraid that, first of all, I'd never take arms and go and fight Ukrainians. And second, I was afraid that they would just use it as an excuse to get rid of me easily, you know. Because already then, I was a pretty loud voice. I was the only one inside Russia talking against the war and basically telling the truth. Not in direct language, I used to call it... I forgot. I used to call it read between the lines, okay? But that was pretty clear. And so I left. How am I in exile? My country chewed me up and spilled me out. My people betrayed me. Because it's not just a lot of people in the West say, well, it's Putin is the bad guy, you know, it's the government. The Russian folks are good. Well, you know what? Tell you what, 80%, well, give or take, let's say 70% support Putin. I can't see myself living among them. Even if we do not discuss the war, if we, you know, don't this just like a regular life goes on, how is this possible knowing that your country is doing this to Ukraine? And then you live in your nice, wonderful life in Moscow as if nothing is happening, right? That's just... I feel incredible guilt for what has happened. I am responsible. I also take responsibility because, you know what? I used to pay taxes in Russia. I used to work and live there. And those taxes went to the military-industrial complex, and the missiles and bombs and guns were funded with my taxes. I am responsible, and a lot of Russians say, well, you know what, I didn't want that to happen. I'm not responsible. I don't make decisions. Yes, you do. If you a voter, if you are a taxpayer, then you are definitely responsible for what your country and the government does especially wages the war. Okay, so I felt I left on a very short notice, 36 hours. Basically, I packed up and cut all ties with Russia.
Yes, quite famously.
Yeah, I don't intend on going back. I just can't. People say, and a lot of foreigners, a lot of members of Inside Russia community say, well, Konstantin, we wish you this to be over so you can go back to your peaceful country. How? Again, explain me, please. I don't understand how. And it looks like I'm out for a very long time, if not forever. It's been pretty devastating our lives, not just myself, but my family. We have 3 kids. It's me and my wife. We've been taken out and thrown into the unknown. Okay, so I'm doing my best coping. I find my salvation in bringing Russians and Ukrainians together here in Tashkent. I have founded a community called Tashkent Breakfast Club, where we just meet, and that's both Russians and Ukrainians. I also participated in the Ukraine. There's just Ukrainians living in Tashkent. They also have accepted me into their group. I am doing a charity project called Brain Drain. I'm helping both Russians and Ukrainians to find a new home in the United States. I'm trying to keep myself busy with the channel. This is saving me, but otherwise it doesn't feel good. Okay, it's pretty devastated. It's a huge part of me has been taken out. Let's put it this way, and that's how I feel. I still feel responsible, and I still feel guilty. And every time that Ukrainians, I meet Ukrainians here, they shake my hand. I find salvation in that. And every time, I'm glad that you've invited me to your channel, and then I'm talking to the Ukrainian side right now, and then that's also, I find this bit by bit, I find personal salvation in that.
Well, you should. What you're doing, I have found what you have been doing a great asset to me as I try to communicate to my mostly American and other English language speaking audience, what is going on. You have been a great source of information for me from inside Russia, the name of your channel, and rightfully so. So please do understand that there are many of us who are greatly appreciative of what it is you do, and which is why you have been somebody that I have wanted to have on the channel since I began it. So if you can take any heart and solace in that, it would please me. However, having said that, you're right. There is a lot of anger here in Ukraine towards Russians, all Russians. Some of it is rational. Some of it is not rational. I spoke a little while ago about the hatred in Odessa, which used to be, if not pro-Russian, then certainly sympathetic to Russia. It's an odd question to ask you because you're not here, but I'm sure that you, as you say, you speak to Ukrainians in Tashkent, and I'm sure you're hearing the voices of Ukrainians as they cry out here. Can this wound ever be healed? Will you ever be brothers again with Ukrainians and Russians? Can you see a time when Russians and Ukrainians can be together in fraternity?
This is one of the most painful questions, because you asking me that, and I recall the times that I spent in Ukraine, and I never felt in a foreign country, being in a foreign country, in the past when I visited. I always felt like I was among very similar people who were sincerely interested to learn how, who had sympathy to Russia. And now I understand, or it's my understanding, is that not anytime soon we will be able to be brothers. And whatever was between Russia and Ukraine, and there was a bond. It's been shattered. It's been lost. Ukraine's been betrayed, and Russia. I really have a hard time describing what Russia has done to Ukraine. Is it genocide? Is it the war? Is it madness? It's sheer madness. Okay, for what? For try to take Kiev and then leave in a couple of weeks, leaving disaster behind you, for stealing the territories of Ukraine, and changing Russian constitution. So it includes all this, how they say, newly liberated lands or newly found lands or whatever it is.
How is Zaporizhia Russian?
Look,
No.
I used to supervise a plant of electric technical equipment in Zaporizhia. I spent lots of time there. I visited very frequently, and Odessa, Zaporizhia, Dnipro, there weren't any Russians there. And all of a sudden, in 2014 or 2022, all of a sudden, Russian government says, you know what, there are plenty of Russian people, we need to liberate them. Before, for decades, all were Ukrainians. Okay, and even in Donetsk, I went to Donetsk quite a few times, not too far from Rostov, and I did not see one Russian person. Of course, everyone spoke Russian. Of course, we had very similar values, very similar culture, but those people weren't Russian. But
No.
just like that, they became Russian, and Russia had an urgent need to go and liberate them, okay? So, again, coming back to your question, I don't think that this can be healed. I see, when I look at Ukrainians here in Tashkent, I see pain, and they don't show it that much because they have respect for me. They don't want to hurt me, but you know what? You don't have to show. I can see it in their eyes. I can see it in the way they act, they behave, and I don't think that we'll be brothers for generations, if ever. Brothers
Sadly,
and sisters,
Yeah, sadly, I
But
think there's been too
weirdest
much
thing,
blood.
The craziest thing is that some Russians still say that, oh, they're brothers and sisters. I think they're just insane.
Deluded, I think. I remember there was a video about a year ago of a pair, a husband and wife that went to go provide aid in the recently, quote unquote, liberated territories in the Donbass. And they said they were shocked at how they weren't received warmly, that the people in Ukraine. How can you bomb a people? How can you invade a people and then think that they're going to, in a week or in a month or in a year or in 10 years, just forgive you for all the death? I think we've gone too far, Konstantin. There's been too much blood.
Well, I tell you, the bond ended when I remember the first cruise missile. I saw a video. Flew, and a Ukrainian teenage girl was filming, and all of a sudden she was absolutely shocked and confused, and she said, wow, we have a rocket just flew over our house, okay? That was the moment when the bond was broken. And that was the moment when the relationship between Russia and Ukraine shattered, and Russia shattered it.
Yeah. I'll start to, we'll start to kind of wound down here a little bit, but okay, so here's my prognosis, or my prediction of how this is going to go. One way or the other, I think I've heard you make videos where you said you do believe that there is going to be a peace process in 2025 and some sort of either ceasefire or cessation of hostilities, the hot war, as it's called, might end. What do you see as the future for Russia? If the war does come to a ceasefire, a cessation of hostilities, the hot war ends, where does Russia go from here, do you think?
Unfortunately, I don't see a bright future for Russia. Russia has destroyed itself even more than much more than it destroyed Ukraine. Ukraine will shine because Ukraine is on the right side. It has support of the entire world. And the minute there will be a ceasefire or peace or the hot war stops, there will be a lot of international support coming into Ukraine in any possible way. And you wait and see. On the contrary, Russia is the most sanctioned country in the history of humankind right now. And a lot of Russians somehow hope that as soon as the war is over, one way or another, then magically all those sanctions will be lifted. That's a delusional opinion. I don't know if you remember, but there was one sanction against the USSR in the United States. I think it was 1974 or 75. It created a law called Jackson-Vanik Amendment that forbade to sell weapons, high-tech chips and computers to the Soviet Union. So Soviet Union fell apart in 1991, but guess when Jackson-Vanik Amendment was reversed?
You got me there.
2011 or 2012. Like 22 years after the USSR fell apart. And even in the United States, people were ridiculing this amendment, saying, hey, it's kind of outdated a bit, you know. It's fairly easy to create a sanction against someone, but it's very difficult to lift it up, okay? Just a technical legal process. But the thing is, I don't think that there will be too many people willing to lift up sanctions from Russia because, you know, the first thing, again, it depends what's going to happen to Russia. But you know, if Putin or his followers stay in power, then the first thing, then the sanctions are lifted. They will start selling more oil, more gas, and that's bread makers of Russian economy. They're going to take that money and beef up their military, okay? So I don't think that there's a good chance of sanctions being lifted. And that will lead to economic misery. Right now, Russia enjoyed 2.5 years of fairly stable economic period during the war, okay? But everything is falling apart now. I've been predicting all along because I'm an economist by trade and I see, well, it's black and white to me, okay? It's not rocket science. If you do something, you get result from it. There's a cause and effect. So we're seeing the effects right now. And this is just the beginning. The living standard will be dropping a great deal. Russia will continue being isolated in many ways. Perhaps some isolation will be lifted, but a lot of it will stay. There's only one way. Unless Russia accepts responsibility for what it's done. And it's a very painful process. The probability of it is low, okay, because what regular people need to accept the responsibility. And like I said, every time I talk to a Russian and I say, well, you know what, we're all responsible. No, I'm not. I'm not responsible because I don't decide anything. You know, I'm just a little man or woman. I'm you know, it's not my fault. It's not, I didn't want this. I didn't do this. That's not going to fly. You got to take responsibility, just like Germans did in 1945. And then you have to come up to agreements to make amends with the Ukrainians somehow, okay? And that's going to be a very difficult process. And you have to somehow try to compensate for what you've done. And Russians hate this idea. When you say something about contribution to Ukraine, one guy just almost started kicking me for that. When I said, well, obviously we're going to be paying contribution in the future. Why? Why do I have to pay anything? You know, why? I didn't do this, and so forth. So they would have to willingly doing that. And only then international community can embrace Russia and say, okay, you have a chance, let's work together. And only then something good will happen in Russia in the future, okay? Only then it will brighten up. Now, the probability of that happening, unfortunately, is low, in my opinion. Well, I'm glad if I'm wrong, but that's what I'm seeing now.
I can't tell you how much of a pleasure it is to speak with you, Konstantin, because you're absolutely right. One of the things that I have noticed, and I will tread cautiously here, and I will pick my words carefully because I don't want to offend you. I know you're an unusual Russian, but you're a Russian still. You know as well as anybody.
Let me. Excuse me.
You want to correct me?
No,
feel free.
Let me introduce
I don't want to offend you.
You're not offending me, okay? Because it's not offense. I understand what you're saying. It's just it hurts. Because I know you're right. You're right. I know. And there's nothing I can do about that. And
I know, but Russians have this generally, and we're talking, we're painting things with a very, very broad brush here. I understand that. You're not the only unusual Russian in the world. I've met others, and I think the more Russians travel globally, they change a little bit. But there is something about Russian society in a plurality, in the majority, of this insistence on denial and denialism and not looking in the mirror, as we spoke about earlier. Our country has never fought a war of aggression. We've always fought wars of defense. We don't do this bad or that bad, or we don't affect the globe in a bad way this way or that way. There is a prevailing attitude in Russia of thinking that your country can do no wrong, that everything is done to you. It's a state of victimhood. Do you think there's ever going to be a time when the Russian people look in the mirror and go, no, we have to do the hard work. We're the ones. This is something America, having lived in America, I'm sure you must have seen this, because we have the political process of no, we are the ones who must make change. Do you think Russians will ever get to a place, especially if they don't get a determinative loss here, that they look in the mirror and go, no, we have to make those changes?
I hope so. You see, it's a bigger problem in Russia. It's not just this denialism. Russia has been under strongman rule for the past 400 years. People are saying, well, I've been explaining what is the vertical of power in Russia that Putin has built in the last 20 years. He started in 2004. But he didn't invent the vertical of power. It has always been in Russia. Russia had a very short break of fantastic time from 1991 until, early
99, 2001, 2002. Yeah.
That was a transitional time, but the thing is, Russian government disappeared. The strong man disappeared, and people were left. And of course, it was very difficult. But the thing is, they, for the first time in Russia's history, they found themselves making decisions for themselves and being responsible for their lives. And Russia thrived. Of course, it was difficult at first. Everyone was trying to reinvent the wheel. But look, in 10 years, it economically transformed from socialism, communism to capitalism. And look what Russia became in the early 2000s, when the role of government was non-existent. No one bothered. Look at the businesses flourished. Okay, and Russia is... I've studied a lot this phenomenon, but Russia has a lot of great products, great services right now. Okay,
IT. Look at IT. It's a highly educated select. Yeah.
You take a bank, a Russian bank, a large Russian bank, and it's the best service in the world. You have IT, telephone apps. You have online banking. You compare it with American bank, my gosh, it's like yesteryear. Okay. And I can tell you, the service, the service industry is fantastic. You go to Moscow, St. Petersburg, you will enjoy it. Okay. And that is because it takes roots in the 90s. Because that's the decisions, the policies were made that allowed this to flourish. Because it just takes a long time. A lot of Russians went from the USSR to Russia, to capitalism, and they thought that their lives would change to the better overnight. Instead, it changed to the worst. But hey, come on, you gotta go through a transition. And Russia did a great job in a very short time, 10 years, with no help from anyone whatsoever. It transited and it started developing. If it not for Putin, it would be a very advanced country right now. But he came in and he said, you know what, I don't like this. My buddies at the KGB don't like this. We need power. We need government to become strong again. We need to control. And through control, we become rich and all of that, So, and he returned what Russians had for 400 years.
And the corruption. Oh, sorry. Go ahead and finish your thought. I'm sorry.
Let's talk about the corruption. I'll ask you a question.
Sure.
I'll answer your question. So you're saying that do Russians have, a chance of standing in front of a mirror and saying, it's us, we're responsible. Only when Russia changes, they will be able to accept, because they don't feel they're responsible for their lives. That's where the problem is. The strong men on top, the Tsar, the nobles, they decide everything for us. They know better. We're just little people here. We don't, we try to survive. That's all. This is Russian mentality. And I'm not saying Russians are bad people because of that, but that's historic trend for 400 years. And as soon as they wake up, as soon as they start taking responsibility for their lives, things will change like fire, like wildfire. Absolutely. But I don't know whether it happens or not.
Well, I was going to bring up the issue of corruption because I remember during the 90s, there were many who were saying we have to tackle this situation of corruption. And then Putin and his Siloviki and the oligarchs come in and they say, no, it's not that corruption is bad. It's that corruption is not serving the right people. We're happy with corruption as long as it's us who are getting the benefit from the corruption. So I absolutely 100% understand where you're coming from there. You see glimpses of it in the 90s. You saw, I think the last time we had a chance was Bolotnaya Square, the white ribbon. I was on that square, and I saw the Russians. Were you there too? Were you on Bolotnaya? Yeah, yes. That was a moment in time where I saw the Russians that genuinely want to make the changes happen. And it seems to me like that is gone almost completely now. And maybe it's because of the war. Maybe it's because Putin has been more strict in his crackdowns on it. But, again, hopefully once Russia loses here and once the economy sadly, tragically, makes it worse for your average Russian. Let us all hope that those reforms will come back and we'll have another chance at it. I'm not holding my breath.
On the corruption.
Yes, please.
Couple words on the corruption before we move on. Corruption is not a phenomena by itself in Russia. Corruption has always been there, and Vladimir Putin publicly announced a few things that the biggest problem, the biggest enemy of Russia was corruption. That was when we didn't have any enemies, when NATO was a friend, Americans were all right, Ukraine was brothers and sisters, we didn't have any enemies, so the corruption was the enemy. And then he stated quite a few times, corruption, that's what we need, our idea is to fight the corruption. You're right about what was going on behind the scenes, but corruption, it's not really corruption. It's a part of the vertical of power. You see, there are people, there is Tsar, and he holds absolute power. He makes decisions about everything in the country. And he needs servants. He needs people with power to use violence against those who disagree, who stand up, okay? And that is siloviki. Those are government agencies that are vertically built, okay? And they're numerous and they're very powerful. And the thing is, their goal is to serve the Tsar, to make sure that all orders that are given from the top go to the bottom, and no one thinks about the orders. No one questions them. The orders must be obeyed. That's it. In return for this behavior, for this submission, those who have power at the sides, they are allowed to use it at the personal gain. Okay? And this is, you can't fight the corruption in Russia because it's integrated in the vertical of power. This is the bonus. This is the payment to those who support the vertical of power, who serve it. Okay? How can you fight it? It's crazy. If those people
it's
are
like the water
the
you
means,
the air
that's
you
right.
breathe or the water you swim in. I totally. What's the old saying? There's an old 18th century. You'll know him probably better than I do. But there was an old 19th century Russian diplomat, poet. I think it's Lomonosov, who said, "If I were to," and some people say this is not a real quote, but it's been adopted. If I were to fall asleep and wake up 100 years later in Russia, I could tell you what would be happening: drinking and corruption.
Drinking and stealing.
Is it drinking and stealing?
Yeah, I know.
Well,
I know.
Yeah, I mean, it's this is why I genuinely do hope, because I have Russian friends, and I have fond feelings towards you, a Russian. I want this for Russian people. I want them. Putin is, and this system must be addressed at some point. The reforms that people have known for centuries need to be done. So I'm hoping for a Russian loss in this war, and sadly the troubles in the economy, to ultimately have a better outcome for all Russian people, because I have no hatred for the Russian people. I'm an American. I'm angry at Russians right now for trying to kill me with bombs. I'm angry at them for what they're doing to my Ukrainian friends and the people that I live with here. But Russians are just human beings, just like everybody else. I sincerely hope that that when the troubles and the loss of this war, because I do believe it will be a loss, I hope that if there's a silver lining, that those reforms will be that silver lining. I don't know what you think about that.
Reforms, the change of Russian people.
There's Russian society, Russian people, culture, power, the relationship between power and the citizen. Can that change?
It's going to be a transformation so huge that we all will be hearing the sounds of it, okay? Because, we all heard the sounds of the USSR breaking apart and what followed. We failed. I am, as a Russian who is in middle-aged Russian right now. I was growing up back then, and my generation had a chance to change things, and we have failed. We're a failed generation of Russian people, okay? And the next change will come. Nothing is permanent, and I don't know how, I don't know when, but it will come, and it's going to be a big boom.
I agree with you. And just as we do finally wrap up here, and I know you hate talking about American politics, so I'm not going to ask you about American politics. But as I consider myself an unusual American, I love the fact that you say from an unusual Russian. I consider myself a slightly unusual American. Americans travel a little bit more than Russians do, but we do travel. Occasionally. I've lived most of my life actually outside of the United States, so I know what it is to me to be an expat, similar to you. So it's been a really great pleasure talking to you. But a lot of Americans right now, not all, because of course we're a greatly divided country, I see a almost similarity in their feeling of having the rug pulled out of them for American democracy and what they thought was the country that they lived in with the election of Donald Trump. I see a similarity to the Russians that I knew in the 90s who felt that they had their rug pulled out from them. Now, the Soviet Union was 70 years. The American project has been 200 plus years. But I'm not asking you to explain it to me. I'm just asking what you think about it, this kind of equation I'm making. Because I find so often Russian and Americans almost are like looking at one another through a dark mirror. There's a reflection there. Could you, how do I say this without, because I know you don't want to talk about American politics, and that's right. That's 100% right. Do you see any kind of, you must see some of the kind of attitude in America of like, oh my God, we're losing our democracy. And there was a similar feeling in Russia of like, oh my God, who are we with the end of the Soviet Union? You guys, you say you didn't succeed when you made your changes. And I don't think that American democracy has fallen, but the emotion of losing your country, do you see any similarities in our cultures as there's this fear in America of losing? And do you see a similarity for what you guys went through in the 90s? It's an abstract question. I apologize, but you see what I'm trying to get at.
I do not see similarities. Completely different things. You do not have, well, first of all, I don't mind talking about American politics. The reason I avoid is because I'm misunderstood. When I lived in the USA, society was basically not politicized at all, and I didn't care much about who was in the office, the Republicans or Democrats. But now, 20 years later, it's a completely different situation. It's, people fight over it. I don't recognize people in the United States. They've been very, very polarized, and if I say a fact, I'd say, Americans voted for Donald Trump. It's a fact. I don't say that I like Donald Trump. I don't say that I support policies or whatever. I don't. I'm not a voter. I'm not American. But then somehow I get so much hate. Oh, you support Donald Trump. You're saying he was elected. But he was. He's the president for the next 4 years now, right? So, and the same thing, and if I say something that I don't like about the previous, current administration, their decisions on Russia, or I like, I get, no matter what, I can't win. People do not listen. And this is why I avoid talking about it altogether. So I'm making a video on my Patreon right now just about that, to explain my position to people who support me. Even them, they start having disagreements and they put words into my mouth that I never said. Okay. So anyway, that's out of the way. That's pretty discouraging. Let's put it this way. I will not.
I know,
but I can't avoid. I can't not talk about the USA whatsoever, because hey, it's a major player, and American president, no matter who it is, Biden, Harris, Trump or whatever, make decisions that concern Russia and concern Ukraine directly. Okay, so I can't avoid talking about it completely. So. But anyway,
and Trump has his history with Putin, and there's all the rest of it. So let's only hope that in the coming years with the new administration.
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
Answer your question. I don't see any similarities. I don't see that democracy in the United States was somehow eroded. Quite on the contrary, I saw a great proof that the democracy still exists. A lot of people stood up and voted for Donald Trump and made him the president. You can like Donald Trump or you can dislike him. It doesn't matter. The thing is, the majority of Americans spoke. They voted, and he became the president. And all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, kind of expected, but the current administration, instead of calling Americans to take guns and go on the streets and protest, instead of and kill others, instead of like it happens in other countries, instead of trying to hang on to power as long as possible, trying to change the results of the elections, instead they admitted their loss and they said, okay, you know what, we lost. We lost, congratulations, Donald Trump, with winning. American people have spoken. How can you say that democracy is eroding if you have things like that? And I am absolutely sure that in 4 years, Donald Trump will step down. He said that as far as I understand, he said that he's not going to run for the second term. He's going to step down and he will transfer the power peacefully, according to the Constitution of the United States, to whoever comes after him. Okay. And I call this democracy. So I don't see any erosion.
I was only making the similarity in the feeling, because I remember the 90s. I remember Russians in the 90s, and I see Americans, the section of America that is against Trump, feeling very untethered, very, very, because they don't know the country anymore, because they don't recognize it anymore. And I remember that in Russia in the 90s. But anyhow, that's me making a statement, not asking a question.
That's nothing to do with the democracy. A lot of Americans.
No, that's not the democracy. It's just.
That's the country economy, that's the social issues, and that's the policies that politicians made and, created, enacted. The policies, they influence the country. And you know what? If you are active politically, stand up and make your politicians change policies. If you can do that as a regular person, that is democracy. In Russia, we can't do that, okay? No matter whether we like to stop the war in Ukraine, and if we come out and we'll be arrested, okay? That's the vertical of power. But in America, you can do that. And they're mistaken. There are many policies on immigration, on economy that absolutely wrong, mistaken, and they led to the situation where many Americans are now. But that's not about democracy; it's about the policies, and that's
and the attitude
the
and the perception
can be fixed. That they perceive it in the wrong way. The economy can be fixed easily. I think all the problems, they take roots into in living standard. It has deteriorated for many people, and they start blaming others. They need an answer. Why? And then the politicians come and give them these ideas. Oh, because of immigrants. Oh, because of this. No, it's because the policies that the politicians did, that they were wrong. They led the country to this position, but it can be fixed.
Yes, it can.
So I don't
it can.
I don't see similarities.
And I hope so. I hope somewhere down the road, it will also happen for Russia. I don't know if you've seen any of the episodes of my show, but at the end, I always include that quote from Abraham Lincoln. At least we keep trying to change. We keep trying to be better. If we ever abandon that effort to improve ourselves, I would rather move to a place like Russia where they don't even pretend to have liberty. I mean, this is the famous 1855 Lincoln quote I put at the end of every one of my episodes.
I absolutely agree with that. And, I believe in America. I believe that I believe in people of the country. I believe that they still have the power. I believe that they have a power to change things as they like them to be changed. And, one of the latest projects that I've launched is a charity fund called Brain Drain. We help Russians and Ukrainians move to the USA in a legal way, okay? Professionals, doctors, engineers, IT specialists, because I'm doing it because I believe in the country. I believe that Russians who make a decision and Ukrainians who make a decision to move there, they will find happiness. They will, pursue the American dream, and it's not something illusional, but it's real. Okay, they will find it. And if I didn't believe in the country, and if I didn't believe that people can be happy there, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now.
Well, Konstantin, I could get a cup of English breakfast tea and sip it here with you for many more hours. I sincerely want to tell you that your channel has been a great help to me in understanding what's going on inside Russia from here inside Ukraine, which has helped me, benefited me, and hopefully has benefited my audience. So I want you to know I am grateful for you. And from this unusual American to you, an unusual Russian, you give me hope that although it will be a difficult thing to achieve, it is unusual Russians such as yourself, which are going to be the only way if Russia ever is going to make those very important reforms that someday I hope it does make. I think, sadly, your country is about to go through some very difficult things. I'm sorry, and I feel bad about the trials and tribulations that you have to go through as a Russian, standing up for your ethics, your beliefs, your morals. But I also thank you for your time. And if you ever would like to come back on my show, you have an open invitation. And if people would like to support you, obviously the YouTube channel is Inside Russia. I can't recommend it highly enough. These projects that you are doing, the Patreon, the Buy Me Coffees, all of those I will include in the description below here in this channel. Konstantin, I deeply appreciate you. I appreciate that you have come on my show and you have spent as much time as you have speaking to me, and I wish you only the very best.
Philip, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Not all questions were easy. Some were very painful. But you know what? I take it with, I take it. And before we end this conversation, I would like to take this opportunity and tell all the Ukrainians, I know that 3 million people, Russian men and their families, women and children, who have fled Russia in the last 2.5 years, perhaps even more, but I know that I'm speaking on behalf of them, and they would support me. I would like to say, please forgive us. I know it doesn't cut it, but I'm begging for forgiveness.
Thank you very much for your time today, Konstantin. It's been a pleasure having you on my show.